The Ciphers Lament. Prologue. The white room hummed with a sterile chill. Lila's breath hitched, a ragged counterpoint to the rhythmic drip of something unseen. Her eyes, wide and dark, darted between the smooth, unyielding walls. No windows, just a single heavy oak door. A hymn, distorted and mournful, echoed from unseen speakers, each note a prick against her skin. Atonement begins with silence, a voice whispered, close enough to brush her ear. The shadow fell across her face, a hulking silhouette against the pale walls. Lila opened her mouth to scream, but the sound died in her throat, choked by a rising tide of terror. The hymn intensified, a crescendo of dread. Then, silence. Chapter 1. Elias Voss. Elias meticulously wiped the bone-handled scalpel, its edge gleaming under the harsh light of the deconsecrated chapel. The scent of bleach mingled with the faint metallic tang that clung to the air, a perfume he found intoxicating. He ran a gloved finger along the blade, a thin smile playing on his lips. Purity, he thought, must be enforced. His gaze drifted to the altar, now draped in black velvet, a stark contrast to the white walls. Beneath it, a collection of hymnals lay open, each bearing a name etched in crimson. His ledger of divine corrections. He selected his next target, Senator Thomas Croft, a man whose public piety masked a private life of corruption. Hypocrite, Elias hissed, the word a venomous whisper. He carefully placed a white bishop chess piece into a small velvet pouch. It would be his signature, a silent accusation. His thoughts drifted back to his childhood, the oppressive atmosphere of the rectory, the cold touch of Father Michael's hand. He shuddered, the memory fueling the fire of his righteous vengeance. Chapter 2. Detective Mara Voss' rain lashed against the windows of Mara's squad car, mirroring the storm brewing inside her. The call had come an hour ago. A high-profile murder, the victim's throat cut with surgical precision. The description chilled her blood. It was him, the hymn killer. Back after 10 years of silence. Mara gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. She'd never forgotten Lila, her younger sister, the hymn killer's last victim. The case had become her obsession, a gnawing wound that refused to heal. She arrived at the Croft residence, the scene buzzing with uniformed officers. The victim lay sprawled on the opulent Persian rug, a grotesque parody of sleep. Mara knelt beside him, her eyes scanning the room, searching for the telltale signs, the subtle details that others missed. A single white rose lay clutched in Croft's hand, and on the nearby mantelpiece, a white bishop. Mara's breath hitched. He was playing with her, taunting her with echoes of the past. Chapter 3. Elias Voss. The discordant notes of Bach's toccata and fugue filled the chapel, each chord a hammer blow against the silence. Elias sat at the organ, his fingers dancing across the keys, the music a dark symphony of satisfaction. He replayed the events of the evening in his mind, the senator's fear, the precise cut, the satisfying gush of blood. Justice served, he murmured, his voice barely audible above the music. He rose from the organ and walked to a small table where he carefully inscribed Croft's name into a leather-bound journal. He then opened a small silver locket and gazed at the faded photograph inside. A young boy with wide, innocent eyes. "They took everything from me," Elias whispered, his voice filled with a chilling sorrow. Now it's their turn to pay. Chapter 4. Detective Mara Voss. Mara stared at the bishop, its smooth surface reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights of the precinct. 10 years. 10 years she'd relived Lila's murder, haunted by the image of her sister's lifeless eyes. Now the killer was back, and Mara knew she wouldn't rest until she brought him to justice, even if it meant sacrificing everything. She pulled up the files on the original hymn killer case, her heart pounding in her chest. The victims, all seemingly unconnected, united by the gruesome signature. The precise throat incision, the white flower, the chilling hymns left at the scene. And now, the bishop. Mara felt a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. This wasn't just a killer. It was a message, a challenge. Chapter 5. Elias Voss. Elias watched the news reports, a smug satisfaction curling his lips. Mara Voss. She was back, just as he'd anticipated. He'd studied her, obsessed over her, ever since she'd taken Lila's case. He knew her pain, her drive, the darkness that mirrored his own. He'd even sent her a letter, a carefully crafted taunt laced with details only the killer would know, a twisted invitation to a game he was destined to win. He chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. She thought she was hunting him, but it was he who was hunting her. He picked up a small antique music box. Inside, a tiny ballerina twirled to a distorted lullaby. He wound it up, the eerie melody filling the chapel. Soon, Detective Voss, he thought. You'll understand. This is a symphony of suffering, and you're playing the lead. Chapter 6. Detective Mara Voss. Mara slammed her fist on the table, the sound echoing through the silent precinct. The letter. It was a direct challenge, a cruel reminder of Lila's death. Your sister sang a beautiful song, Detective. A lament for the lost. The words were etched into her brain, burning like acid. She'd shown the letter to her partner, Detective Kincaid, a seasoned officer who viewed her obsession with skepticism. He's playing you, Mara, Kincaid had warned. Don't let this get personal. But it was personal. It always had been. Mara stared at the map of the city, her eyes tracing the locations of the victims. There had to be a connection, a pattern she was missing. She thought of the hymns, the chess pieces, the white flowers. They were all pieces of a puzzle, a macabre riddle she had to solve. Chapter 7. Elias Voss. Elias prepared his next performance. His target, a prominent judge, known for his harsh sentences and even harsher secrets. He'd chosen the location carefully, the city's grand cathedral, a place of both beauty and hypocrisy. He slipped into the shadows, a ghost in the sacred space, his movements precise and silent. He watched the judge arrive for evening prayers, a pious facade masking a lifetime of deceit. Elias smiled. The scales of justice are unbalanced, he thought. It's time for a reckoning. Chapter 8. Detective Mara Voss. Mara arrived at the cathedral just as the first news reports were breaking. Judge Maxwell was dead, another victim of the hymn killer. The scene was eerily familiar. The precise incision, the white rose, the chilling hymn left open on the altar. Dies Irae. Mara felt a wave of nausea wash over her. He was escalating, becoming bolder. She noticed something new. A small, intricately carved wooden bird perched on the judge's chest. She carefully bagged it as evidence. This was more than just a signature. It was a message. But what was it saying? Chapter 9. Elias Voss. Elias watched the news, a thrill coursing through him. Mara was close. He could feel her presence, a shadow in his periphery. He knew it was only a matter of time before their paths crossed. He opened the music box again, the distorted lullaby a haunting reminder of his past. He thought of his mother, her gentle voice silenced by the cruelty of the church. He thought of Lila, her innocent life stolen by his hand. They all deserved it, he whispered, the words a mantra against the guilt that gnawed at his soul. Chapter 10. Detective Mara Voss. Mara studied the wooden bird, its intricate details hinting at a skilled craftsman. She took it to the department's forensic anthropologist, Dr. Evelyn Hayes, a specialist in ancient symbols and artifacts. "This bird," Dr. Hayes said, "it's a replica of a medieval reliquary, often used to hold sacred relics." Mara's eyes widened. A reliquary, a connection to the church. She thought of Elias's obsession with hymns, his lair in the deconsecrated chapel. It all clicked into place. He wasn't just killing. He was performing a ritual, a twisted form of penance. Chapter 11. Elias Voss. Elias knew she was closing in. He could feel the heat of her pursuit, the desperation in her steps. He prepared for their final confrontation, a symphony of death and redemption. He laid out his instruments, the scalpel, the hymnals, the music box. He put on his black robes, the vestments of his dark priesthood. He was ready. Chapter 12. Detective Mara Voss. Mara and Kincaid stormed the chapel, their guns drawn. The air was thick with the scent of incense and decay. The distorted lullaby echoed through the empty space, a chilling invitation. They found Elias in the main sanctuary, standing before the altar, a scalpel in his hand. He turned to face them, his eyes burning with a fanatical light. "Welcome, Detective Voss," he said, his voice a low, menacing growl. "I've been expecting you." Chapter 13. The confrontation. A tense standoff ensues. Mara tries to reason with Elias, to understand his motives, but his mind is too far gone, lost in a labyrinth of religious fervor and vengeance. He reveals a shocking truth. He is her half-brother, the product of her father's affair with a young woman from the church. Their shared trauma, abandonment, shaped them in opposing ways. Mara towards justice, Elias towards vengeance. A struggle ensues. Elias lunges at Mara, but she manages to disarm him. He falls backward, impaling himself on his own scalpel. Chapter 14. Epilogue. Mara stands over Elias's body, the distorted lullaby still playing from the music box. The rain falls outside, washing away the blood and the stench of death. She looks at the chess bishop he left behind, and then at the antique bird. She closes her eyes and sees Lila's face, a ghost from the past. She has caught the killer, but at what cost? Her marriage is over, her soul scarred. The final scene shows a close-up of the music box. The ballerina continues to spin, even as the music winds down. A shadow falls across the box. A hand reaches out and picks up a white knight chess piece. The hand closes around the piece. Fade to black.